Why are you doing that? Paused, waiting for cache command to complete? No.
You failed me!
Well, I guess this one's a write-off. I've been using this thing for almost 3 months now, and it can be seriously frustrating. This is the AnyCubic Kobra Max. I've done some really big prints with it. I want it off my workbench, so let's go ahead and review this thing. Right away, as I always want to be honest with you folks, let's get the review disclosure out of the way. AnyCubic did provide this machine to me free of charge, however no money changed hands, and they have no say in this review at all. They won't see it before you folks see it. Let's start with the specs of this machine. The build volume is 400 by 400 on X and Y, and 450 millimeters tall on the Z axis. It is officially the largest machine in my studio based on build volume and footprint that it takes up in my shop. The Y-axis consists of two 40-20 rails with a nice wide spacing to really support the bed. There are quick adjusters on the front of those extrusions for easily adjusting the belts, and at the back end there is a single NEMA 17 motor with dual drives on it, driving both of those belts. The stock build platform is a glass bed with a grid printed on it that promotes bed adhesion. Moving up the frame, we have a pair of Z-axis motors and lead screws, so the gantry is supported at both ends, and there are a pair of support rods that go from the back edge of the frame to the top of the Z to support the Z-axis further. The extrusion system on this machine is a Bowden type system using a BMG clone setup that is a clear housing so you can see the gears and the filament inside of it, exactly the same as you would find on an AnyCubic Viper or Cobra Plus. The tool head on this machine rides on V-slot roller wheels and has a really nice shroud hiding the V6 Volcano clone hot end that is behind it. That is really nice to see, as a machine this big is going to really want to flow some filament for larger prints. The hot end is mounted to a strain gauge at the top that is used for auto leveling. The machine uses the nozzle of the hot end to press on the bed at various points to get a leveling map of the machine, and that is the only way to level this. There is no manual adjustment. Flipping the machine over, we can get to the electronics box. There is a single 80mm 24-volt fan cooling the mainboard of this thing, and the mainboard itself is a Tri-Gorilla Pro A V1.04 in my revision. Taking a deeper look at the mainboard, we can find that both Z-axis motors are driven off of a single stepper driver. There is a blank spot for a second one that would allow for independent motor action, but it is not here. The stepper drivers are TMC 2209 quiet drivers, and the processor in use here is an ARM 32-bit HC32F460 processor that we will definitely come back to. The power supply in this machine is a 500 watt unit. The reason for such a large one is that the bed itself is 24 volt and heated by that power supply, not mains voltage. There is a 40 by 20 millimeter fan at the back of the power supply that pulls heat from the electronics box through the power supply and out to cool it. The machine does have power loss resume functionality, which I accidentally tested during the unboxing of it because it tripped the breaker on my power strip at my workbench. There is also a filament runout sensor on the machine. And last but most certainly not least, there is a 4.3 inch color LCD touchscreen for your control interface on this machine. Through my testing, I discovered something weird about the Kobra Max that I had to investigate. I always encourage when you're using a new printer or a new material to temperature tune that material on the printer you're going to be printing it on. But this is especially true on the Kobra Max. When I started trying to tune in filaments and run larger nozzle sizes on the Kobra Max, I started to see some serious issues with overheating of the filament, tons of stringing, and just not being able to tune it in the way I want it. On the Kobra Max, I found after extensive testing that it likes to print at significantly lower temperature settings, somewhere between 185 to 200 Celsius. I got a little investigative and set up a multimeter on the machine with a temperature probe between the silicone sock and the heater block, right next to where the thermistor goes into the heater block on the hot end of the Kobra Max. When I set the temperature to 200 degrees Celsius on the machine, you can see where I landed on the actual temperature reading. Okay, that might be what you would expect, but it was actually higher than what I expected to find. So I pulled up another machine, the Focustech Odin 5, which also has a E3D V6 knockoff Volcano setup, and I put the probe in the exact same place on that machine. Heating up to 200 degrees Celsius here, I reached about 165 to 167 Celsius. This is much closer to the expected results that I had going into this testing. For a bit of a control, I then went to my Ender 5 Plus and repeated this process. It has a different heater block design, more of a dragon style one, and I again stuck it close to the thermistor location in the silicone boot, and sure enough, this read out at 165C. This is clearly very anecdotal evidence, but from what I can see, it seems like the Kobra Max is going hotter. When you put it to 200 Celsius, it might be overshooting that by a fairly significant amount at the actual extrusion point. After talking to a few people who have Vipers, Cobras, and other Kobra Max owners, this seems to be a fairly universal experience, so it does seem to be something about the choices that AnyCubic is making in building their printers. Temperature adjustment alone didn't really solve all of my problems with stringing and or cooling on the Kobra Max. Especially when I moved to the larger nozzle sizes, I was seeing consistently stringy and nasty prints that I just wasn't able to control. I try to leave any machine that I'm reviewing entirely stock because I don't want to color the results that I get versus what somebody's going to get out of the box. But with all of the results that I was getting, I just felt that the part cooling was lacking on this machine. This machine does have dual 4010 blower fans for part cooling, but the shroud has very large duct openings that really don't guide the air down toward the nozzle, and they're also end about 5 to 6 millimeters above the print height, so by the time the air gets down to the part that it's cooling, it's dissipated and spread out quite a bit. So I jumped into Fusion 360 and designed some printable add-on ducts that go onto the original shroud and guide the air from those blower fans more directly to where the part cooling is needed and funnel it for better control of the air. After installing these, I saw a significant reduction in the stringing and temperature issues that I was getting with my prints overall, and I felt confident to move forward. You can find a link in the description down below to the STL file so you could print these ducts for yourself. They will fit an AnyCubic Viper, Kobra Plus, or Kobra Max. Now let's peruse the prints produced by this printer. First though, I need to thank my patrons on Patreon. It is thanks to you folks I can test things like the Kobra Max to its fullest extent. All of the test prints that I have to show you in this video, I just weighed them. They added up to over 11 kilograms of filament used, and that's not including the failures. It is thanks to you folks that content like this is at all possible. If you're not already a patron, please consider signing up to help support content like this, and also get access to exclusive 3D print designs and behind the scenes content. Once I figured out the weirdness of the tuning here, we were off to the races with printing. In front of me, I have a grand total of 3.4 millimeter nozzle prints that I did on this machine. Because a machine of this scale, in my opinion, you're wasting your time using a 0.4 millimeter nozzle, so I did primarily larger prints with larger nozzle sizes. The little owl print is an SD card print, one of the G codes loaded up from the factory, and overall the print quality on this turned out pretty darn good, and I would not be disappointed with this as a first print on any machine. Some overhang issues on the abdomen and chest here, and then on the crown at the top of the head there are these blobs and stringing issues from temperature, retraction, some of that, but I didn't slice this. This was a G code that was on the SD card. The first print that I did during the unboxing of this machine was this red benchy here. Overall, I think the print quality on this turned out pretty good. This was by no means a fast benchy, but the bow, the overhangs all look pretty good. The worst I can say is some blobbing and stringing in the cabin and the windows on this one. Well, that, and if you flip it over, it has no base. This was the very first print that I did, and it was the first print that got stuck hopelessly to the bed and broke getting peeled off. But let's face it, if you're looking at the Kobra Max, you're probably looking at it for large scale prints. So for me, in comes the Flexi Factory designs. I've printed a handful of their designs at some pretty large scales. From the 200% Dragon, where I just ran through a bunch of different green filaments I had, ran till it ran out, switched to another one and kept on going. That's why it's all stripy. This one filled the bed volume of the Kobra Max, and it was right up to the edge of it. I actually had to increase the bed dimensions to like 405 by 415 in the slicer to get this to fit at all, which I was able to do. The actual bed size is a little bit bigger than 400 by 400, but it would probably be best to stick within those dimensions. You can see some definite cooling issues on the horns of this one. I could have probably lowered the temperature or slowed down when it came to that point. The 333% Flexi Golden Elephant shows some inconsistencies and issues that are absolutely down to slicer settings. Things like gaps in the top infill are likely related to not enough perimeters despite being printed with a larger nozzle. Doing larger printing is not as simple as scaling up your design and hitting print. There are a lot of considerations to be made when you're going bigger. That's a little out of the scope of this video. Get subscribed and let me know if you'd like to see a video about the intricacies of larger scale printing. At a point, I realized I hadn't pushed the Z height nearly high enough on this machine, so I jumped into Fusion 360 and designed up this to be printed in vase mode. It's just under 450 millimeters tall and just under 400 by 400 wide. This was an excellent test of just everything about the Kobra Max as it was running around there continually, spiraling upward in vase mode. I expected some type of Z-banding or wobble in the print as it got really high and start to see some artifacts. And we really don't until really close to the top. That was actually because filament was globbing up on the nozzle, and when it did so, eventually it fell off and got dragged through the print at a couple of different layer points. This print used just over 1 kilogram of filament, printed with a 1 millimeter nozzle at 0.5 millimeter layer height, and took around 19 hours to complete. The 250% dinosaur, the overall print quality on this one is alright. It's got that cute pink belly with the lime green top portion to it, and it does have a bit of a birthmark. Yeah, inside of the leg of this one, that is a bit of the bed material stuck to the underside of this print. This was one of the last prints I did for this review, and it took a literal chunk out of the bed of my Kobra Max because I had to hammer this thing off of the build plate. It just was not coming off any other way. But what I can really say on this one is you see something that is a trend on a lot of these prints. Blobs. 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 I have a pretty good idea of what's causing those blobs in the prints and how they could be corrected, but there's a bit of an issue doing that on this machine. We'll cover that when we get to the cons about this printer, but I first want to get the pros out of the way and give you the breakdown of what I think of it after my use of it. Build volume on the Kobra Max. It's only 50 millimeters on all dimensions bigger than my Ender 5 Plus, but when you need that 50 millimeters, you need that 50 millimeters, and there's no way around that. I maxed out the build volume X, Y, and Z on this machine with relatively little issue. I like the dual Z axis on this machine. I wish it had independent stepper drivers on the board, but it does work fine on here and really support the gantry at both ends. The filament runout sensor on this machine has worked well for me, and on such a large machine, you are going to be running through spools of filament, so that was really good to see. I like how easy this machine was to assemble. The hardest part about assembling it is just the scale of it, handling the big parts. But if you set it out on a floor in a living room or something where you can really work around it, I was restricted by my workbench and camera angles while unboxing it. It is pretty easy to put together compared to other printers. I'll put a link to the unboxing VOD for the live stream in the description below if you want to see the process. Belt adjustments are easy thanks to those adjusters on the X and dual Y axis belts. Out of the box, this thing is probably the quietest printer that I have worked with so far. The auto leveling on this machine is almost a necessity at this build size, and it works out pretty well most of the time. It's going to be good for beginners as they don't have to deal with trying to manually level a bed of this size. The touchscreen interface on this machine is very straightforward to use and figure out. There's not much depth here, arguably too little depth here. Pretty much the only option in the menu system that you can really adjust is the Z offset, the distance between the nozzle and the bed after the leveling process. You can do that live while it's printing, and it works well in that regard, but this is probably where we need to start the cons. Because the resolution on the Z offset is just not nearly fine enough. It is in 0.05 millimeter increments. I usually use down to 0.001 millimeter increments on my other machines that have a Z offset adjustment. At the very least, I would like to see this down to a resolution of 0.01, not 0.05. That's really it for the depth of the menu system. You can adjust the speed of printing in percentage while it's going. If you want to get finer tuning on this machine, you have to terminal into it with a laptop and USB cable, and that's adding a level of complexity that doesn't need to exist. While we're in the menu, the preheat buttons here. There's preheat PLA and preheat ABS. I would not recommend printing ABS on the Kobra Max. The hot end in this machine is an E3D V6 clone. It is not a genuine V6, and it is Teflon lined, meaning there is a Teflon Bowden tube going all the way to the backside of the nozzle in this hot end. The printing temperature of ABS and ASA, for the most part, is around 250, 260 C, which is also the temperature that Teflon starts to break down and emit toxic fumes. It is not advisable to print ABS with a configuration like this. I printed a ton of PLA and a bit of PETG on this machine without issue. I already noted the glass bed on this just over adheres so much to the point that mine is now broken, so I'm gonna have to figure out looking in for a replacement one. I want a PEI coated spring steel sheet, which I feel like would serve this machine really well for print removal. Such a big bed, it's really nice to just crack your prints off the bed by flexing it. But I'm not entirely convinced that's going to be a great idea on the Kobra Max either. You see, the bed plate on this machine, the actual aluminum under the glass, is only 2 millimeters thick. Even a base model Ender 3 has a 3 millimeter thick aluminum plate for a bed. I'm not sure if the next one's necessarily a con, but it's something you should absolutely keep in mind. This machine has a big footprint. It takes up a lot of space in my studio. If you're using the stock spool holder on the left-hand side of the frame, this machine needs a 36-inch by 36-inch square space to sit upon. Now it's time we talk about what the heck that failure at the very beginning of this video was, and get into my biggest gripes with this machine: the firmware, the mainboard, and AnyCubic themselves. What happened there was I used Prusa Slicer's ability to add an M600 command at a certain height so that the machine would pause and I could change out the filament for a different one, allowing me to have multicolor printing with no additional hardware. In Cura, this is called pause at height, I believe. I do this all the time. It's how I achieve the multicolor print of my 250% barrel. What I wanted to do with the Kobra Max since day one was make a bigger barrel. But on the Kobra Max, this function just causes your print to fail. The machine gets clogged up, confused, and you have no way of ever resuming the print. Well, there are two workarounds, but neither will save the print once this has already occurred. The first is you can put a timer on the command, so it'll count down and then just automatically resume the print. I've heard that works, but I haven't tried it because that serves me no function. I would have to be there babysitting the printer when it paused to make sure that I could change the filament before it resumed. The second one is inelegant, but it's what I've been doing on the Kobra Max so far. Cut the filament, pull it out of the filament runout sensor, and it'll trip that to pause the print. Then you can change the filament and hit resume, because that function on the machine does work well. This is problematic for a couple of reasons. One, it's hard to control exactly where this occurs. I usually aim for the infill of a part, so if there's any problems, you're not going to see them on the exterior. The biggest problem for me is, yet again, if it's the middle of the night on a multi-day print, I'm not going to be there to make this happen exactly where I want it to be. I'm going to have to babysit the printer to use this method. This is one of a couple of firmware problems I've come across with this machine, the other being linear advance. This is an advanced function in Marlin that allows for finer tuning of a machine. It'll reduce the output pressure of the nozzle when you're coming around corners or coming to the end of a perimeter to prevent blobs. On almost all of my machines, I tune in linear advance, and it can really help to alleviate the blobbing problem. But on the Kobra Max, despite the latest firmware release notes claiming that linear advance is in there, it doesn't work for me. I've tried tuning it and it made no difference to the extrusion of the printer. It could be a bug in my particular machine or the entirety of the firmware, I don't know. And that brings us to the problem with AnyCubic themselves. The Kobra Max, like probably the majority of currently available printers, is running Marlin firmware. That is open source firmware developed by a community to help the entire 3D printing community grow. Companies like AnyCubic can use that firmware for free for their machines as long as they follow some open source guidelines. And this is where AnyCubic is falling down. The problem here is the processor on the mainboard that I mentioned earlier. That is not supported by the main branch of the Marlin firmware or the Clipper firmware. Now, companies are free to take Marlin firmware and branch off of it for the needs they have, like supporting that processor, but they are required to release the source code for it, especially upon request. If a company wants to add a specific function, they can, but then that needs to be released so that the developers can decide whether or not to roll it into the main firmware. I contacted AnyCubic and requested the source code for this machine so that I could get the functions I wanted working. They told me they would release it to GitHub in 2 to 3 months. That's just not how open source licensing works. Now, don't get me wrong, they are not the only ones guilty of this. A lot of companies fall afoul of this problem. I informed AnyCubic this was not okay and I would be mentioning this in the review, but they seem to feel that because they have an eventual date that they intend to release it, that they're not doing anything wrong. I will come back and put a note in the description or a pinned comment down below if and when AnyCubic releases the firmware source code. And maybe you don't care about this. It matters to me, but it might not to you. So let's talk about who this machine is for. Don't take my laundry list of cons about this machine or my saltiness about the firmware as a total indictment of the Kobra Max. This is the large format DIY 3D printer that I'm going to be recommending for the foreseeable future. Sure, something like my Ender 5 Plus is printing better, but that is a heavily modified machine, and I can't recommend the out-of-the-box experience that comes with. The perfect candidate for a Kobra Max is somebody who wants to print big things and is okay with blowing through filament. I don't know whether to include it as a con, but you are going to use a lot of filament printing big stuff. That's just the way it is. I mean, when was the last time you saw a filament spool spinning this quickly feeding into a machine? It also means big failures, so when your prints go wrong, you're wasting a lot of time and material. But if you're somebody with a little bit of seat time in 3D printing, and you want to print big props, cosplay items, things that you maybe aren't worried about having to sand and finish to get the best final result, the Kobra Max is probably a good choice for you. However, if you're looking for your first machine, or a machine that you're mostly going to be printing smaller objects on day to day, and every once in a while you want to print big things, I would really recommend sticking to a smaller machine overall. Because you do have to remember that you're heating up that entire 400mm bed no matter how much of it you're using. If you're only printing a tiny little thing, you still have to use that 500 watts of power to get there. If the technology on display in the Kobra Max is of interest to you, the auto bed leveling, the nice belt adjustments, the touchscreen interface, but you're not going to use the full volume of it on a regular basis, maybe look at something like the Viper. It's effectively a smaller version of the same machine. I mean, let's face it, the Kobra Max is really the Viper Max. Overall, I think the Kobra Max is a pretty good value at the $600 it's going for on Amazon right today. If you are interested in a Kobra Max, there'll be an affiliate link in the description down below to help support more content like this. Alright, I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please drop it a like, it really helps out. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of the Kobra Max? Are you interested in one? Get subscribed to keep up to date with all the content and to ensure your prints don't fail. No guarantee on that, but it can't hurt. Thanks for coming around, folks.